When I was a kid, my best friend's name was Sam. We lived only a few miles apart and hung out all the time. We often had sleepovers at each other's houses. Sam's house was a bit nicer and larger than mine, in my opinion. The event I'm going to talk about took place when we were both 10 years old. Sam and I went to the same school, and one day late in the school year, I went over to his house after classes. I brought my sleeping bag with me and planned to sleep on the floor of his bedroom. After school, we hung out for the rest of the day, probably playing video games and talking about stuff. We had to go to bed around 10 or 11 p.m., so I set up my sleeping bag, and Sam turned off all the lights and climbed into his bed. Every light in his house was off, and I didn't like that. At home, I always kept a small lamp on in the corner of my bedroom to give me at least a little light. Before that, I had a nightlight. I just didn't like complete darkness. Sam's bedroom door was open, and there was a small light I could see from something, maybe the thermostat. I tried to fall asleep, but I wasn't really tired, and for some reason I just lay there awake. Sam always seemed to fall asleep quickly, but I couldn't that night. Sam's bedroom was at the end of the hallway where the other bedrooms were. Everyone else in the family had long since gone to sleep, and the house was completely silent. Suddenly, I thought I could hear the sound of someone walking. Maybe it was Sam's parents. The house was carpeted, so footsteps were very quiet. However, the sound stood out in the silent house. I looked over and thought I could see someone coming into view through the open bedroom door. It was so dark that I couldn't see clearly, but I kept watching. I began to make out a man walking into the doorway of Sam's room. I immediately knew it wasn't Sam's dad. I had no idea who it could be. I closed my eyes and didn't move a muscle, pretending to be asleep. The man stood there for a while. After about a minute, I opened my eyes again. The man was still standing there in the doorway, watching us. I couldn't tell if he was looking at me specifically. I tried not to move and opened my eyes very carefully before closing them again to pretend to sleep. I heard the man walk away down the hallway. I didn't know who he was, why he was there, or if he would come back. I kept my eyes closed and didn't move. Eventually, I fell asleep out of sheer terror. The next thing I knew, Sam was tapping on my shoulder, telling me to wake up. It was still dark. I noticed Sam's bedroom door was now closed. He told me there was a man in the house and that the police were on their way. We were supposed to stay in his bedroom and not leave. We stayed inside, not hearing much else. Eventually, the police arrived, and we continued to stay in the bedroom. After a long time, Sam's parents finally came and told us what had happened. They found the man hiding in the basement. He had tried opening Sam's parents' bedroom door, which woke them up. The man fled, and Sam's parents called the police. They knew the man was at the other end of the house. Sam woke up from the noise, left the bedroom to see what was going on, and then returned to wake me up. It must have been the same man I saw earlier in the night. I'm really glad the man didn't cause any harm, but I never found out why he entered or how he even got in. I slept over at Sam's house multiple times after that, and luckily, nothing like that ever happened again. I once matched with someone on a dating app, and it completely put me off ever using apps like that again. At first, we seemed to get on quite well enough to set up a date. However, something about him made me uneasy. During the date, I realized we would never become an item because he came across as a pretty weird guy. He was more than a little intense, and after I rejected him, he became a bit stalky as well. Unfortunately, he already had my contact information, so he would sometimes reach out to me. I kept in touch with him, just barely via an app called Line. Honestly, he felt like the sort of man who might do something bad if I ever blocked him. The intensity he had was just haunting. I really didn't want to provoke him. I know that sounds dumb, but that's just the way I felt. Eventually, though, I stopped opening his messages and just left them unread. After a while, he appeared to get the picture and stopped contacting me. I know it's not nice to give someone the cold shoulder like that, but he left me no other choice. If I ever did reply, he would immediately bombard me with messages at all hours. One particularly cold winter day in my city, something bad happened. It was freezing as I walked home from work. I didn't think I could feel any colder, but then someone suddenly jumped out in front of me from within a dark alley. My heart felt like it was turning to ice. It was him, the guy I'd gone on a date with months ago. There I was, confronted by this creep who just tried to ambush me. I thought I had been successfully avoiding him. Obviously, I was really scared. He stood there, blocking my path, glaring at me. I was shocked into silence and didn't know what to say or do. After a couple of awkward seconds, I asked him what he was doing there. He said something like, "What's so bad about two lovers meeting? I mean, it's only natural I'd come around to see you if I can't reach you by phone."
Right.
What he said made no sense. It had been months since we had spoken, and even longer since our one and only date. This guy was crazy. My fight or flight response kicked in, and I just started to run. All I wanted to do was get home and somehow forget about this entire encounter. As I was running, I realized that if he had met me on my route home, then he knew where I lived. I realized it would be dumb to go straight home, so I stood there as it snowed, thinking frantically about what to do next. The solution was obvious. I needed to go to the police. I ran to my local Koban, a small police station located at key areas in the city, such as in front of train stations or busy shopping districts. I had used this one several times and had been grateful for their help. After I arrived and made the report to the officers, they said they would patrol my area just to be on the safe side. I felt reassured but not exactly safe. After that night, I became a recluse for a while. I developed a fear of leaving the house. 3 months or so went by with no sign of that one-date wonder. Slowly but surely, I regained some of my confidence. I went outside by myself for the first time in quite a long while, relying on the help of my friends and family until then. I planned on heading to the supermarket. I knew the route and was close to the station nearby, so I thought it was relatively safe. I got about 20 paces down my street when suddenly I heard a voice call out to me. I was addressed by my full name. It wasn't an OY or a catcall. Whoever this was knew me. The man shouted at me again, "Hey Connor, I've been waiting for you." He crossed the road with a light jog and stood a couple of paces behind me. I could see it was the same man. "Hey, you know you don't need to call the cops on me. Don't you think what you did was a little bit mean, sweetheart?" I was so scared I couldn't make a sound. I knew I had to get out of there right now. I'm happy I chose the route I did for my first venture out because I knew exactly how to get back to that station. I ran there and reported what happened. The man fled, and I have to say that since then my life has been pretty incident-free. I guess the second report really scared him off. Kind of. That's exactly how it was before though, so I'm a bit worried I've been led back into a false sense of security. I feel like it might just be the calm before the storm. Once again, winter is rolling around and the nights are getting darker. When the snow begins to fall, I get scared, and all those memories of being followed and ambushed by that man return to me again. When I first began driving, I was about 19 years old. I hadn't had an interest in driving before that, so I didn't do it until it became a necessity. In the beginning, I was really awful when it came to knowing where I was going. I would get lost a lot. My sense of direction is much better now, but it took quite a while to improve. My first significant time getting lost was also the scariest. I lived in the suburbs and had to take the freeway into the city for something. It sucked because I had never driven on the interstate before, and I was a bit scared. I did get to the city and took care of my errand, but I was eager to get back to the suburbs. However, I didn't realize that I had hopped onto the wrong interstate. They both started with the same number, so in my driving naivety, I assumed I had taken the correct route. I was so focused on driving and the other cars around me that I didn't notice right away that the surroundings were different. I didn't know all the exits either, except for the one close to where I lived. So I kept looking for it, but it never showed up. I started to get a little worried. It wasn't until I had driven an hour and a half that I really began to panic. I hadn't come across my exit yet and had no idea where I was. I realized I had taken the wrong route when I saw a sign for a town I knew was over a 2-hour drive away from where I lived. I wasn't sure what to do. I knew I had driven west and needed to go east to get back home. So I found an exit going east and decided to take that road, hoping it would lead me back in the right direction. This was long before mobile phones with GPS, so it was the only plan I could think of. It's amazing how rural areas can exist so close to suburban and urban ones. The road I took led me through a really small town and then into even more rural territory. I was driving through cornfields, which I had never seen before. Although the drive was more comfortable than the interstate, it eventually became unnerving. I felt incredibly alone on that road, no other cars in sight, and only my headlights for light. I kept glancing into the rearview mirror, but the darkness revealed nothing behind me. The whole experience was unsettling. As I was driving, I noticed something sticking out of one of the cornfields. As I got closer, I realized it was a car, front end first, sticking out of the cornfield. I slowed down, wondering how long it had been there. With the road being so empty, I worried that someone might have crashed and needed help. I turned around to check if someone needed assistance. I pulled over, got my flashlight from the trunk, and made my way to the car. The darkness and quietness were ominous, making me nervous. The car had definitely crashed into the corn, with tire tracks leading to it. I half expected to find someone injured or worse inside, but to my relief, the car was empty. I relaxed, thinking the driver must have walked away and maybe gotten a ride into town. As I was about to leave, I suddenly heard a voice scream, "Hey, you!" The voice was loud and freaky, coming from the cornfield. I turned around, almost falling over in my shock, and saw a man hiding in the corn. He rushed over and slammed his hands on the car's hood, shouting at me to get away from his car. I tried to apologize, but he started coming around the car. Panic took over, and I ran back to my vehicle. I saw the man open his car door and grab something as he stormed toward me. Before he could reach me, I started my car and sped away. In the rearview mirror, I saw something shining in the red tail lights, but I couldn't make out what it was. It took me a long time to calm down. I was so freaked out, expecting the man to appear in my back seat like a supernatural horror movie scene. Eventually, I found my way back to familiar territory. I never found out why that guy was hiding in the cornfield, but he really scared the daylights out of me.